I found out why my kids forced me into a care home, so I cut their inheritance early. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. My son spent 6 months convincing everyone my mind was slipping, so finding the active real estate listing for my house the morning after he locked me in this care home was a moment of absolute, terrifying clarity. David and Sarah had played their parts perfectly over the last year. There were the gentle hand-holding sessions, the tearful meetings with the facility director, and the sympathetic sighs whenever I supposedly forgot a conversation we never actually had. They moved me into Oakwood assisted living yesterday under the guise of an emergency medical directive, stripping me of my keys, my car, and my independence. They thought they stripped me of my access to the outside world, too. But I spent 40 years as an architect. I designed complex commercial facilities, meticulously detailing every square inch of structural blueprints. My entire professional life was built on noticing discrepancies that other people missed or tried to hide. They took my main laptop, but they didn't realize my old backup smartphone was still tucked inside the hidden zipper lining of my leather shaving kit. This morning, I booted it up, connected to the guest network, and checked my property tax portal. That is when I saw the massive influx of data queries on my home address. I immediately navigated to Zillow. There it was. My custom-built home, the one I poured my soul into, was listed for sale. The description boasted about immediate availability and a highly motivated seller. I am the sole owner, and I certainly never authorized a real estate agent to list my property. I sat on the edge of the sterile, uncomfortable bed, my hands resting on my knees. I was not losing my mind. I was being deliberately erased. They needed me out of the way, physically contained and completely discredited. The question was not if my children were betraying me, but why they needed to liquidate my entire estate with such frantic speed. They hold my medical proxy, but they do not have financial control. I cleared the browser history carefully and hid the device again. The listed asking price was almost $500,000 below the actual market value. The sheer audacity of the discounted price tag forced me to reevaluate every interaction I've had with my children over the past 8 months. The gaslighting began so subtly, I didn't even recognize it as an attack. David would come over for Sunday dinner and quietly turn off the gas valve behind my stove, only to act alarmed when I couldn't get the burners to light. He would look at me with manufactured pity, asking if I was feeling all right. Then Sarah started weaponizing her endless reservoir of therapy speak. She would sit in my living room, clutching a mug of tea, and talk about my cognitive safety and emotional sunsetting in that soft, patronizing tone people use for toddlers. They coordinated their efforts perfectly. If I placed my keys on the counter, one of them would pocket them and later find them inside the refrigerator. When I finally snapped and yelled at David for moving my things, Sarah recorded the outburst on her phone to show my primary care physician as proof of my erratic, aggressive mood swings. They built a flawless paper trail of my supposed decline. The medical evaluation they used to force me into this facility was signed by a neurologist I had only spoken to for 15 minutes over a video call. At the time, I actually started to believe them. I spent sleepless nights terrified that my brilliant mind was rotting away, mourning the loss of my intellect. Sitting here in this restrictive room, the profound betrayal burns in my chest. They used my love and trust against me to bypass standard legal guardianship protocols. They isolated me in this high-end prison specifically because it restricts outside visitors without family approval. I need to know exactly how far they have gone to dismantle my life. I retrieved the phone again, waiting until the hallway was completely quiet before opening my banking app. I typed in my password, holding my breath as the loading screen spun. The screen flashed a glaring error message stating my primary account had been completely frozen. Finding my primary checking account frozen sent a cold shock through my system. But panic is a useless emotion when you are trapped. I needed actionable data. I navigated to the United States Postal Service website to check the status of my mail. Sure enough, a permanent change of address form had been filed 2 weeks ago, routing all my correspondence directly to David's suburban address. They were intercepting everything: bank statements, tax notices, legal documents. Anything that might tip me off to their scheme was being diverted. Just as I was processing this, Nurse Elena walked into my room with my morning medication. She is a sharp, no-nonsense professional who strictly follows the rules. I immediately dropped my hands to my lap, feigning a slight tremor. I looked up at her, maintaining the facade of a confused old man. "Elena," I whispered, my voice intentionally raspy. "I think my son forgot to pay the property taxes on my house. I'm so worried the county will take it. Could you possibly look it up on your phone? Just to ease an old man's mind?" Elena hesitated, but her empathy won out over protocol. She pulled out her personal phone, navigated to the county assessor's public database, and typed in my address. I watched her eyes scan the screen, waiting for the confirmation. "Mr. Arthur," she said softly, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Your taxes are paid, but there is a new lien recorded against the property as of last Tuesday." I kept my face blank, though my mind was racing. "A lien? You cannot place a lien on a property unless there is a massive, unpaid debt attached to the owner, and I haven't carried a debt in 2 decades. I thanked Elena profusely, letting my head drop back against the pillow as if the interaction had exhausted me. Once she left, I stared at the ceiling, assembling the pieces. David and Sarah were not just trying to steal my money. They were desperately trying to cover up a catastrophic financial liability. I needed to find out whose name was actually listed on that mysterious county lien. David and Sarah arrived for their scheduled visit right after lunch, practically radiating fake warmth as they walked into the facility's visitor lounge. I was sitting by the window in a wheelchair I didn't actually need, deliberately staring blankly at the parking lot. "Dad, oh, you look so much better today," Sarah cooed, wrapping her arms around my shoulders in a suffocating hug. David hovered behind her, glancing at his expensive watch. He looked exhausted. The bags under his eyes were heavy, and his tailored suit looked slightly rumpled, betraying his polished facade. "We're taking good care of your house, Dad," David said, pulling up a chair. "You don't need to worry about a thing." I turned my head slowly, letting a vacant, confused smile spread across my face. "That's good, Davy," I mumbled, deliberately using the childhood nickname he hated. "Did you remember to check the water heater? You know how it leaks." David forced a chuckle, exchanging a quick, triumphant look with Sarah. They were entirely convinced my brain was turning to mush. "Yes, Dad, we checked it." I let the silence stretch for a moment, letting my hands shake slightly on the armrests. "And the safe in the basement?" I asked, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Did you make sure the combination dial was locked? The one behind the filing cabinets?" David nodded quickly. "Yes, I spun the dial myself. It's perfectly secure." He squeezed my shoulder, thinking he was humoring a senile old fool. But the trap had already snapped shut. My house does not have a basement. It sits on a concrete slab foundation, and I certainly do not own a floor safe hidden behind any filing cabinets. David hadn't been to my house in weeks to check on anything. He was lying to my face to keep me docile. Their arrogance was making them incredibly sloppy. David's phone vibrated loudly on the table, displaying a text message from a bankruptcy attorney. The flashing notification on David's screen vanished almost instantly as he snatched the phone off the table, his face draining of color. He abruptly announced they had to leave, citing a fabricated business emergency. As soon as they were out the door, I requested to use the facility's secure landline under the pretense of calling a grievance hotline. Instead, I dialed Marcus. Marcus has been my estate lawyer and closest friend for 30 years. He is a meticulous bulldog of an attorney who helped me draft every legal document I possess. When he answered, I didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Marcus, it's Arthur. My mind is perfectly fine. The kids committed me under false pretenses. I need you to pull the deed and title history on my house right now." I heard the sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Marcus didn't question me. He just started typing. Within 3 minutes, the silence on the phone grew heavy and dense. "Arthur," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave, "there is a general power of attorney filed with the county clerk. It grants David total authority over your real estate assets. It was recorded 3 weeks ago." My grip on the plastic phone receiver tightened until my knuckles turned white. "I never signed a power of attorney, Marcus. You know my protocols." "I know," Marcus replied grimly. "I'm looking at the digital scan right now. The signature is a damn good forgery. It was notarized by someone named Kevin Vance." A ticking clock suddenly materialized in my head. With a forged power of attorney already in the system, they could legally finalize the sale of my house at any moment. They didn't just want my inheritance. They were actively stealing my current equity to plug a massive, hemorrhaging hole in their own lives. We had to move instantly before the house closing went through. Marcus warned me that David was legally empowered to drain every single account by tomorrow. I retreated to my room and pulled out my backup phone, the pieces of this fraudulent puzzle rapidly snapping into a cohesive architectural model in my mind. David's intercepted notification from a bankruptcy lawyer, the wildly discounted real estate listing, and the forged power of attorney all pointed to an impending financial detonation. I needed to know the exact nature of the blast radius. I opened the browser and searched for Kevin Vance, the notary who stamped the forged document. It took 10 minutes of digging through state licensing records to find his current employer. Kevin Vance wasn't an independent contractor. He was a junior loan officer at a private commercial lending firm called Apex Capital Solutions. I immediately texted the company name to Marcus. I sat in the dim light of my room, listening to the muffled sounds of the care facility through the thin drywall. 20 minutes later, Marcus sent an encrypted email to my hidden device. The contents were staggering. Apex Capital Solutions specializes in high-risk, short-term bridge loans for commercial real estate developers. David's supposed booming tech startup was a complete fabrication. He had pivoted into commercial real estate development 2 years ago and had drastically over-leveraged himself on a massive, failing warehouse project on the edge of the city. He owed Apex Capital over $3 million. But commercial lenders don't just hand out millions without bulletproof collateral. David didn't have the assets to secure that kind of capital on his own. He needed a pristine, unencumbered asset to pledge to the wolves at Apex. My custom-built, fully paid-off home was sitting right there, ripe for the taking. This had absolutely nothing to do with my inheritance. This was a desperate, criminal cover-up. David had secretly pledged my entire estate as collateral for a loan currently in default. The breadcrumb trail was now glaringly illuminated, but the sheer scale of the deception was sickening. Marcus and I spent the next 3 hours exchanging encrypted messages, systematically dissecting the financial ruin David had unleashed. David had used the forged power of attorney not just to list the house, but to legally bind my property to his failing commercial warehouse project months before he even locked me in this facility. He had effectively mortgaged my life to finance his arrogance. But David isn't detail-oriented enough to pull off a multi-layered financial crime of this magnitude alone. He is reckless, but he is not a legal strategist. That required someone who understands compliance, asset transfers, and behavioral manipulation. It required Sarah. I asked Marcus to run a background check on Sarah's recent employment history. She was supposed to be a senior financial compliance officer at a regional bank. Marcus replied with a single, devastating PDF attachment. It was a public civil docket filing from 2 months ago. Sarah was quietly terminated from her bank and was currently facing a civil lawsuit for embezzlement. She had been skimming funds from dormant client accounts to keep David's warehouse project afloat. When she was caught, the bank demanded immediate restitution to avoid pursuing federal criminal charges. The two of them were cornered animals. If David's project went under, he faced complete bankruptcy. If Sarah didn't pay back the bank, she was going to federal prison. Their solution was to drug their father, declare him medically incompetent, forge his signature, and liquidate his life's work to pay off their respective crimes. The speed of the house sale wasn't about greed, it was about survival. The closing on my house was scheduled for this coming Friday. I suddenly realized that simply stopping the fraudulent home sale would not be nearly enough. Understanding the catastrophic reality of their situation shifted the entire dynamic of my confinement. I was no longer a victim trapped in a care home. I was the sole arbiter of their impending destruction. If they don't secure the cash from the sale of my house within 30 days, Sarah is going to federal prison for embezzlement, and David is going to be completely destroyed by Apex Capital. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. These were my children. I taught David how to ride a bike. I walked Sarah down the aisle. For a brief, agonizing moment, the father in me wanted to surrender. I could just let the sale go through. I could stay in this beige room, eat the terrible food, and pretend my mind was truly gone. It would save them from prison and total ruin. I could absorb their sins and let them walk away cleanly. I sat by the window, staring out at the manicured lawns of Oakwood Assisted Living, wrestling with my failure as a parent. Was I too focused on my architectural firm when they were young? Did my absence create this monstrous entitlement? But then I remembered the cold, calculated way David turned off my gas stove. I remembered Sarah recording me in my own living room, weaponizing my frustration to strip me of my human rights. They didn't come to me for help. They didn't ask for a loan. They decided I was disposable. They chose to mentally torture me and lock me away in a facility to rot. They were not trying to salvage their lives. They were trying to violently harvest mine. Protecting them now would require me to legally validate the lie that I was mentally incompetent. The moral fog completely evaporated, leaving behind a cold, structural clarity. As an architect, when you discover a foundation is fundamentally corrupted by rot, you do not try to patch the drywall. You demolish the structure and rebuild. Saving David and Sarah meant accepting a permanent legal status as an incapacitated ward of the state. It meant living the rest of my days under their absolute control, subject to their whims and whatever facility they deemed cheapest once my money was gone. I refused to let my legacy be a casualty of their criminal incompetence. I messaged Marcus with a new, highly specific set of instructions. We were not going to file an emergency injunction to stop the house sale. We were going to let them proceed right up to the edge of the cliff. I needed them to firmly commit to the fraud on the record. If we stopped them now, they could claim the power of attorney was a misunderstanding or a mistake. I needed undeniable, documented proof of their intent to defraud a supposedly incompetent senior citizen. Marcus was hesitant, warning me about the extreme risk of letting the transaction get this close to the finish line, but he understood the architecture of my plan. I was going to turn their own fraudulent momentum against them. I instructed Marcus to prepare a very specific type of legal challenge. One that would not just halt the sale, but automatically trigger an investigation by the State Attorney General's office regarding elder abuse and financial fraud. The trap had to be entirely airtight. Just as Marcus confirmed the paperwork was ready, my door swung open unannounced. David walked in holding a clipboard, flanked by a woman carrying a notary stamp. David's smile was painfully tight, his eyes darting nervously around my small room. "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice dripping with forced casualness. "I just need you to sign some routine medical release forms for the facility. It's just standard bureaucratic nonsense." The woman beside him refused to meet my eyes, clutching her notary bag like a shield. I recognized the paperwork instantly. It wasn't a medical release. It was an irrevocable transfer of guardianship. Signing it would grant David and Sarah absolute legal dominion over my health, finances, and living arrangements, superseding any previous documents. They were getting desperate, trying to lock down my estate completely before the house closing on Friday. "Oh, Davy," I rasped, letting my hands tremble violently as I reached for the clipboard. "Is this for my medicine? My head feels so foggy today." David swallowed hard, nodding quickly. "Yes, Dad. Just sign at the bottom. It helps us take better care of you." I took the pen, ensuring my grip was clumsy and weak. I slowly dragged the ink across the signature line, but I didn't sign my actual name. Decades ago, Marcus and I established a legal fail-safe. If I ever signed a critical document using my middle initial Christopher instead of my standard signature, it was a legally binding distress signal indicating I was signing under extreme duress or without capacity, rendering the document instantly void in his presence. I deliberately scrawled Arthur C. Hastings across the line, making the letters jagged and uneven. David snatched the clipboard back the second the pen lifted, relief flooding his face. He nodded to the corrupt notary, who quickly stamped the fraudulent page. They walked out of the room convinced they had finally secured the keys to their survival. The moment the heavy door clicked shut behind them, I dropped the trembling act entirely. I pulled the hidden phone from my shaving kit and typed a rapid, three-word message to Marcus. "The snare holds." Marcus replied immediately, deploying the countermeasure. "See you tomorrow." I spent my last night at Oakwood Assisted Living packing my few belongings into my small duffel bag with meticulous precision. I did not sleep. I sat in the dark, watching the digital clock on the bedside table click forward, feeling the immense weight of what I was about to do. I was about to systematically destroy my own children. But the grief had already been processed months ago when they first convinced me my mind was fading. The people I raised were already gone. The adults trying to ruin me were strangers. By 9 a.m. the next morning, The facility's front desk called my room, informing me I had visitors in the private administrative conference room. I walked down the sterile hallway, my posture perfectly straight, my strides steady and measured. I didn't need the cane they had forced upon me. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the conference room. David and Sarah were sitting at the polished mahogany table, reviewing the final closing documents for the sale of my house with a real estate broker. They looked up, expecting to see a shuffling, confused old man being escorted by an orderly. Instead, they saw me standing tall in the doorway. And directly behind me, carrying a thick leather briefcase, was Marcus. Sarah's fake smile instantly collapsed into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic as Marcus locked the door. I walked to the head of the table and sat down, folding my hands perfectly still. "Good morning, David." "Sarah," I said, my voice crisp, resonant, and entirely devoid of the frailty they had grown accustomed to. David's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He stared at Marcus, then back at me, the color rapidly draining from his face. "Dad? What is Marcus doing here?" David stammered. "Marcus is here to inform you that the sale of my house is canceled," I replied smoothly. "Along with your fraudulent power of attorney and the voided guardianship papers I signed under duress yesterday." Sarah jumped to her feet, her therapy speak entirely abandoned. "You can't do that. You're medically incompetent. We have the doctor's evaluation." Marcus calmly opened his briefcase and slid a heavy, bound legal document across the table. "Actually, Sarah, your father is perfectly competent. But more importantly, you cannot sell his house or pledge it to Apex Capital." Marcus tapped the document. 14 months ago, Arthur anticipated your financial instability. He legally transferred his home, his accounts, and all his assets into an irrevocable trust. He is no longer the legal owner of the estate. The trust is, and I am the sole trustee." The silence in the room was deafening. The realization hit them simultaneously. They hadn't forged a signature on a house owned by Arthur Hastings. They had attempted to illegally sell property owned by a highly protected corporate trust. Their fraudulent power of attorney was completely worthless. "You tried to steal a house I didn't even own," I said quietly, watching David physically deflate in his chair. They realized they had just committed federal wire fraud against a trust they could not control. The fallout was immediate and utterly devastating. David slumped forward, burying his face in his hands as a low, guttural sob escaped his throat. He knew Apex Capital would trigger the default clauses on his commercial loans by the end of the day. He was facing total bankruptcy and the liquidation of his own assets. Sarah was hyperventilating, backing away from the table as if the legal documents were radioactive. "Dad, please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "The bank. They're going to press charges. I need that money. I'll go to jail." I looked at my daughter, feeling a hollow ache in my chest where my sympathy used to reside. "You should have thought about federal prison before you stole from your clients, Sarah. And you definitely should have thought about it before you drugged me, locked me in a home, and tried to steal my life." Marcus handed a folder to the bewildered real estate broker, instructing him to leave immediately and notify his agency of the attempted title fraud. Then, Marcus turned to my children. "I have already forwarded the forged power of attorney and the voided guardianship papers to the state attorney general's office for review," Marcus stated coldly. "You have 30 days to vacate any properties associated with Arthur's trust. All communication going forward will be strictly through my office." I stood up, picking up my duffel bag. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. The precision of the legal trap was far more punishing than any emotional outburst could ever be. I walked toward the door, leaving them drowning in the consequences of their own arrogance. David whispered a final, desperate apology to my back as I placed my hand on the doorknob. I walked out of Oakwood-assisted living into the bright, blinding sunlight, the heavy mechanical doors sliding shut behind me for the final time. Marcus had a private car waiting at the curb. The drive back to my custom-built home was quiet. We didn't need to discuss the carnage we had just left in the conference room. Over the next 3 weeks, the architecture of their lives completely collapsed. Apex Capital seized David's warehouse project and forced him into immediate Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Sarah's former employer was notified of her new financial reality, and the bank officially handed her embezzlement file over to federal prosecutors. My phone rang constantly for the first week. Long, Rambling voicemails from David begging for a bridge loan. Hysterical text messages from Sarah accusing me of destroying her life. I didn't block their numbers. I simply let them scream into the void. It was vital they understood that the silence on my end was intentional and permanent. I had established the ultimate boundary. I would not allow myself to be consumed to keep their fraudulent fires burning. Yesterday, David showed up at my front gate, standing in the rain, pleading through the intercom for just 10 minutes of my time to explain himself. I sat in my kitchen, sipping my coffee, and watched him on the security monitor. I didn't press the button to speak. I just watched him eventually give up. His shoulders slumped as he walked back to his car. The urge to fix their problems was completely gone. They had chosen to bury me alive, and I simply refused to stay quietly in the dirt. The house is exceptionally quiet now, but it is a comfortable, structurally sound kind of silence. I spend my mornings in my drafting studio, sketching new architectural concepts just for the pure joy of creation. I am 72 years old, my mind is razor sharp, and my legacy is entirely protected within the ironclad walls of the trust. Cutting my children out of my life was the most painful decision I have ever made, but it was the only way to save myself. Family loyalty should never be a suicide pact. I step out onto the back patio, breathing in the crisp morning air, watching the sunrise illuminate the home I built with my own hands. I am finally free.